Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of WWT Experts. My name is Matthew Coble. I'll be your host today. Today's expert is Mike McGlynn, who is Worldwide Technology's Vice President for Global Security. Mike leads a team of senior security advisors and architects to drive security technologies and great business outcomes for all of WWT's clients. He's also quite active in the security venture capital community, both as an advisor, board director. I'm sure he has some interesting thoughts there. Prior to Worldwide Technology, Mike spent 25 years with the National Security Agency, the NSA, as a technical director and a leader in areas of software development, crypto mathematics, and system design. So he's delighted to have him here. Mike, welcome. Good to see you, man.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
Thank you for coming in. How's it to be here in St. Louis?
Oh, it's awesome. I love it. Thank you.
Good deal. All right, well, as we do, let's jump right into our question set. And I want to start by asking, cybersecurity really touches every aspect of a business these days. And I know cybersecurity leaders really want to have a seat at the table from the start to make sure security is a priority within their organization. So how do they do that? How do they get involved right at the start instead of being that afterthought after the fact?
Yeah, great question, Matt. So I think for CISOs in particular, there's a lot of challenges in the industry, right? And the first thing is recognizing every business is a technology business, whether you're in the financial industry, whether you're in pharmaceutical, manufacturing, retail, every business is a technology business. And as a result, they're dealing with the risk of cyber. And fundamentally, that's the first recognition, that every business has to deal with the cyber risk. That starts with leadership, but more importantly, it's about relationships and being relevant. So think about the CISO as not only the business leader managing risk, but also the enabler for the company, right? One of the key issues that leaders have to think about is not only business issues like revenue and cost, but how do we manage, how do we reduce risk? Those relationships start with understanding, having empathy for the other business leaders, right? Understanding what the business models are, what are the pressures that they're under, right? The revenue pressures if you're working with the business teams. So number one, understanding the business, understanding and being business relevant, being an enabler to those organizations rather than a disabler, right? It's really important that they communicate in a way that is an enabler, meaning rather than historically, no, you can't do that, that's too much risk, we got to stop doing that. How do we get to yes? How do we manage risk in a way that makes sense, gets the business on the path they need to be on, but making sure that risk is understood and managed appropriately. And I think that's fundamentally one of the key issues. The second area is really around education, right? They are the lead educator when it comes to managing risk and cyber within the organization. And that starts with going to the board, going to the executive team, going to the individuals across the organization, providing a framework where education around cyber is understood, from the senior executives all the way down to the individual contributors, and making sure that they build that DNA, that culture of security within the organization. And I think that's where they become relevant and they can influence.
Yeah, well, I love that. And I love the idea of that empathy and that sort of service mindset, right? Because I think so often these things are kind of fact-based, intellectual, just by the book, by the numbers, and that empathy can really power things. We also know that, you think that CISOs need to think more like hackers and continually innovate to subvert attacks or defend against adversaries. How do CISOs get to that hacker mindset, and how do they sort of come in and out of that to make sure that they're being effective?
Yeah, great question. When I spent my time in the government, NSA has two missions. One is to defend and protect U.S. communications, but also as an intelligence agency to go out and understand, what maybe some of our adversaries, are up to. And so, a lot of understanding of both the offensive and defensive side of cyber. And I would first start with understanding motive. What are the motives? Why would somebody want to attack my organization? And kind of starting with basics. It may be financially driven. Maybe they just want to make some money, and so I'm an easy target. Maybe it's intellectual property. I'd really like to take your intellectual property and leverage that for my own good. Mm-hmm. It could be geopolitical, certainly with what we're seeing right now with Russia and Ukraine. Maybe it's a cyber weapon, right? I just want to take out this entire business and have some kind of effect on critical infrastructure. And so there's lots of reasons why adversaries may attack and disrupt a business. So I say, start with that understanding. Why are they doing these things, right? And once you kind of get that kind of understanding and, enumerate, start to think about the how, right? I think we very quickly jump to the how, right? And rather than like, okay, well, they're going to attack here, they're going to try this. Let's start with motive. And then kind of work it from there, right? So kind of decompose the problem. The second thing that I think is a little bit misunderstood is, hackers are people, right? And so they're a little bit lazy at times. They want to find the easiest path to success, like many of us. They don't want to try the most complex thing. And so, what's the easiest way to get to my objective? Right? What's the easiest way to get to my data? What's the easiest way to disrupt that business? And sometimes it may not even be a cyber event. It may be people. Perhaps I can target a particular individual that has the correct access, right? And so I think you have to step back a little bit and kind of boil it down to more simpler terms, understand motive, understand where critical assets are, and then think like a hacker in the sense of what's the easiest route they may take, right? Mm-hmm. And so I had a great conversation recently with some leaders in the industry, and they talked about phenomenal architectures and zero trust, and they were going down all these wonderful technology solutions. And I said, what are you doing around insider threat? Right? Yep. And they're like, oh, well, we haven't thought about that. And I said, well, listen, your system administrators may be the biggest risk. We don't like to think about our people because we all have good people, but that may be the biggest risk, right? And so making sure that you have controls around privileged access. How do you ensure that you have visibility into what's going on at the system administrator level? And so it's kind of like stepping back from the problem. Sometimes we get too deep, right? And maybe just pull back a little bit, look at it from the outside. And then build relationships with law enforcement. I think that's extremely important. They have a culture in law enforcement to understand motives of, criminals and criminal behavior. And I think that gives you a new perspective. And so that's kind of like general advice I would give on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I wanted to ask about that last item. How many organizations really do that, sort of engage with law enforcement up front, ahead of time, to kind of have those relationships in place?
I think it varies widely. Again, back to, there's a lot of maturity and immaturity in our industry. I think that it's extremely important to build relationships early, right? The last thing you want to do is have an incident or a crisis, and then who do I call, right? If you have those relationships up front with law enforcement, right? And there are many other relationships, but law enforcement in particular is an important one. It builds an avenue where you have some more confidence. Right? You have relationships, they'll educate you, you may educate them, and it gives you a little bit more balance in terms of how you're going to manage your business.
Yeah. Well, I also know something that we do with, clients and out in the marketplace is, playbooks, tabletop exercises, and that those are good tactics to get, the staff of an organization involved in thinking through security and bringing some of that, probably creative thinking to it. Like, oh, I didn't think about that part. So, I'd like for you to kind of walk us through where security teams should start with that, and how do you really engage your organization to accept the idea of doing it in the first place, and then go on with some of these playbook tabletop exercises to kind of walk through scenarios.
Yeah. I think, again, I like to get back to basics, right? I think sometimes we overthink and over-engineer some of the complexities, and it is a very complex industry, but I kind of view it as more like exercise, right? Everybody knows exercise is good. I don't do it enough, unfortunately, but right, everybody understands it's a good thing to go out and go for a walk every now and then, or go to the gym, right? And so why do we do that? We want to stay healthy, right? We want to feel good. We want to be sharp. And I look at tabletops as just a form of exercise in terms of cyber operations, right? You don't want to learn how to defend in the middle of a breach, right? There's too much pressure. There's too much oversight. There's too much anxiety and emotion involved when you're in the middle of a breach. And so, things like tabletops give you an opportunity to build muscle memory, right? To practice, to make mistakes, to get better, to iterate, right? And to become more healthy in the way that you defend an organization. You mentioned playbooks also. Playbooks are kind of like the how, okay? Here are the processes we need to go to. And so being able to develop a plan before you have to execute is extremely important, right? And just having a general agreement across the business lines, roles and responsibility, who's responsible for communicating, who's responsible for execution, how do you communicate if potentially your email systems are down. All of that, the detail can be discussed well before you run into a true incident. And so I think, taking a tabletop, viewing it as health exercises, how we get better, stronger, using playbooks as a way to talk about how we do it, I think it's extremely important. It's critical, and it's a low-cost barrier to kind of getting on that journey of maturity.
Yeah,
right?
And I know those are great exercises. I also know that, at Worldwide, we've launched not too long ago our cyber range, which is another context in which people can do a form of those kinds of exercises to get that real world practice and that fitness that you're
and around the cyber range, that takes it even another level. It's in many cases we do tabletops kind of like around a table. It's by its definition, right?
It's the name, right?
It's a little bit of a paper exercise, right? Sure. Whereas you get on the cyber range and now it's real life, keyboard activity, and it's more of a simulation of an actual event. And so I'm a big believer in not only tabletops but able to use the technology to also improve with that exercise, right?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So both dimensions of that.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as like the difference between sort of fitness and training and so forth, that we do as our exercise, or maybe not enough as we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then like getting into like
some of us.
Some of us. Yeah. Right. Or versus like doing like a tough mutter, right? Like you like go get in the dirt and thrash through the woods. And,
great analogy.
And move through it. So, and I think clearly both are important, but it's nice that we can offer.
And you need both.
And you need both.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, how do you counsel CISOs to take the case to the board, senior leadership, and kind of convey the idea that cybersecurity needs continued investment in the company, and sort of to articulate that to those business audiences?
Yeah, and we talked earlier about building that culture, that DNA, if you will, of security, right? So back to the educating, making sure they understand risk is a critical function of a senior leader at the company, including the board, the CEO, and others, right? They will understand that because that makes sense in business terms. But it's not infinite dollars either, right? And it's sometimes difficult to say, take these dollars, put it to cyber, and what's the ROI? Right? Mm-hmm. So start to use terms like ROI, start to use metrics and KPIs that maybe non-cyber individuals and leaders can understand, and be consistent in the way that you communicate. I think sometimes cyber leaders will show up one quarter to the board and communicate some metrics or stats, and it's like, well, that's interesting and a good dialogue. And then 3 months later, they come back and everything's changed, and it's almost like, wait a minute, what just happened? So I think it's important to be consistent, to use the language of the business leaders, talk in terms of investment dollars, talk about ROI, talk about maturity and return on that investment, talk about prioritization, where's the best ROI in terms of the capabilities that we need, and making sure that the board is engaged, right? That there's an opportunity for them to ask questions and that they are educated along the way. And I think with that consistency over time, you can show progress, and that the more of a level of comfort, right? That hey, these dollars are being wisely spent, and we can see the reduction in risk based on those investments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so the cybersecurity industry continually changing and evolving. I mean, we read about things in the technology media, the business media, and just the general mainstream media all the time around these things. And there are two things at play. Number one, we've talked about, there's talent shortage, like a vast talent shortage in the market in general. And I think we've kind of moved to a place where organizations sort of expect eventually they're going to be attacked. There's going to be a breach. So it's not, it's to be ready to recover, to business continuity and stuff and so forth. So how are we counseling CISOs and other leaders in the market to deal with both that talent shortage on the one hand and that level of readiness they need to have on the other?
Yeah, so the talent shortage has been around for 10, 15 years, right? And it's not getting better. A lot of dialogue in the industry around talent issues. Obviously universities have a role here, but we all have a role. We all have a role and responsibility to educate, groom, provide opportunity for the next generation of cyber leaders. And that doesn't mean that a early in career cyber person needs to have a technical degree. What we're finding, even at Worldwide, we're bringing in individuals that have backgrounds in program management, law enforcement, military, you name it. We have an individual on our team from partner management who wanted to change careers. So, thinking outside the box, there are some core skills that you may need or need to develop as part of this journey, like critical thinking and sometimes innovating and thinking out of the box. It's a difficult industry in many ways, right? So being able to be passionate, I think that passion in our industry is absolutely critical because there is so much confusion and it's dynamic. And, if you like steady, easy kind of consistency, that's probably not the right industry. But there's sort of like these core skills, Matt, that I think I what I see time and time again make people successful. And it's not necessarily technical degrees or I'm a cyber expert. It's more around, are you inquisitive? Are you passionate? Do you love to learn? Do you like change? Do you like to have tough problems and solve them? So those kind of characteristics are key. And that's just not, hey, I'm going to go find a computer science major. So I think, number one, broadening your view, your aperture, if you will, around the types of people that can be very successful in cyber is the first thing. The second thing is that, the reality is it's very difficult for organizations to build and grow and retain a core group of talent. And so leveraging partnerships, right? Whether that be outsourcing parts of your cyber business, whether that be, bringing in talent from the outside from other organizations and, contractual subcontracting group agreements, and building good partnerships, right? We have the ISACs, which are vertical specific organizations, financial, healthcare, and others, where teams are collaborating to help manage risk and share ideas. And I think collaborating within industries and across industries are extremely important when it comes to building talent. And so there's not a single answer here. I think that we all feel this, but I think it's also opening up our thoughts around how do we grow talent, going forward, and giving back, I think, is extremely important.
And a theme I hear there that I like, and I know we've talked about, is both within an organization, within a vertical, and just in the security industry in general. Like, we have to be secure all together and sort of kind of connect with each other. And think about it that way.
Yeah. Good point. When I think about secure all together, because I love that term, right? It's a lot easier to go alone and go fast. But the reality is in cyber, we don't need to go fast. We need to be consistent. We need to be thorough, right? And rigorous in some ways, right? And that requires a level of patience, right? Everybody wants to go fast. But when you bring the group together, right? When you build that culture of DNA, that takes time, right? And growing next generation out takes time. But we all have an obligation to do that.
Well, I want to build on that last question a little bit, go off script slightly. So I'm curious, there's a lot of energy in the market now, a lot of coverage around AI, and ChatGPT and all the things. But I'm curious whether you think that AI will be kind of net helpful to security, or is it going to just increase the risk, right? Because on the one hand, I think maybe AI can help with the talent shortage, right? Because we can automate some things that we couldn't otherwise do. But on the other hand, it also, I'm sure, is going to aid the attack side, or the adversary side as well. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, so not to be Switzerland here, but I think it's going to be both. And,
well, it's sure going to be both.
Yeah, right. It's absolutely going to be both. And I always like to start on the attacker side because I'd rather kind of try to get that dimension of it to understand how to defend. Right. Kind of work backwards, if you will, rather than I'm going to defend everything and hope that I don't have a hole. Right. So when I think about the attacker, how does AI come into play? A couple things, and certainly with ChatGPT is phenomenal technology, right? But there's going to be more advances. I think we've hit a point, but I think there are going to be more, and we're going to see incremental improvements in machine learning and AI. But and we had a great conversation a couple days ago about this in one of the Teams chats, just around where is the industry going to head with machine learning? And I think about the attacker first. We've heard about things like botnets. Okay. Yeah, for years. Hundreds or thousands of computers that are all attacking onto them, right? Well, now we're going to start talking about intelligent botnets, right? Maybe they're not going to just do a denial of service, but maybe they're going to slowly probe in different areas of the organization consistently, right? We talk about things like pen testing. On the attacker side, well, pen testing is just, it's your point of view here. Intelligent pen testing, and maybe we're going to start to use social engineering and machine learning together to kind of exploit the human side of our business, right? So I think the attacker is going to leverage AI earlier, unfortunately, than maybe the industry is going to adopt AI. I mean, we're all excited about ChatGPT and the potential, but I think we already have adversaries thinking about offensive use of that. And frankly, they have the resources, the time, and the energy to focus in on very narrow portions of our industry, right? And so I think there's an advantage there, right? And it's kind of always an arms race in any domain of security. So I think we're going to see an acceleration on the offensive side of our business, which will then in turn bring a reaction on the defensive side. And I think that I'm really excited about where this is going. And again, back to the people side of it, imagine having ChatGPT as your buddy as you're in an operations room and you're trying to defend an organization. And this is giving you best practices and an expert system and a way to be able to help you very rapidly defend. It's just truly exciting, right? And then be able to dynamically defend, right? Just like we offend on the offensive side. I think there's just so much potential to bring machine learning into our industry. And it's been a conversation, frankly, for 15 years. And I've always been a little skeptical. I finally feel excited and positive around where machine learning can really help us going forward. So it's a pretty cool time.
Yeah, it is a cool time. I get excited about this stuff.
Yeah, you can tell I get a little passionate. I could probably sit here for another hour and just talk about that. But
yeah. All good. Well, I mean, we're kind of moving into the space, but we know that there are new technologies, new companies, startups coming along, and you're active in the VC community and the startup community. And that sometimes results in clients having probably too many tools in their architecture and infrastructure because they're experimenting with things. So, how should CISOs decide to kind of evaluate the new and emerging technologies, AI, ML, or otherwise, weave them in, and how are we helping organizations navigate that?
Yeah. So to your point, there are a lot of security companies out there today. There'll be more tomorrow and next year. And that can be detrimental to the industry, frankly. In fairness, there's been over the years a lot of investment dollars put into the security industry. Not all of them have been successful. But it feels to me at times that if you have a few developers and some investment money, you're suddenly a security company and a security expert. And that's a problem also, right? So recognize that the quality of the solutions span, the traditional bell curve, if you will. There's going to be companies out there that frankly maybe aren't going to be as helpful. And then you're going to see some really innovative, disruptive technology that comes out. And so the key is really to understand need, okay? I often see organizations kind of gravitate toward the latest, coolest thing, but they don't have basic capabilities like patching or visibility. And it's like, okay, well, why are we going way over here and talking about this really cool technology when you still can't do the basics,
fundamentals,
right? And so I keep pulling back almost to really cool, like let's go play over there, but let's get the basics, kind of nailed. And it's like, the soccer team that can't drop the ball but wants to do the advanced, corner kick play, right? And I love soccer, and we really have to get the basics first. But that said, I think there's really exciting technology that's emerging on the market. Hundreds of technology providers out there. We see, unfortunately, companies that have 10, 20, 50, in some cases well over 100 security tools, not tools, right, but hundreds plus tools. And that's a problem also. Forget the cost, CapEx, OpEx, but the people cost of that, right? The tools need to be used by people, or the results need to be used by people. And how do people consume all this? So, number one, simplify, right? Try to reduce the noise, reduce the complexity of your environment, reduce your risk, right, by simplifying, mapping your tools into frameworks like NIST or ISO or others, right? That's the first thing. Looking at partners like WWT, shameless pitch here, right? We have our Advanced Technology Center. We have many of these technologies in our labs, and being able to literally put vendor A, B, and C together, look at a set of criteria, and be able to evaluate for a given customer what is the right solution given your requirements and your needs and your maturity. So number one, do your homework, but leverage companies like WWT that have advanced technology centers. Focus on the basics and build off of that. And be aware that not every solution is equal, right? Be a smart buyer.
And be ready to say no to stuff.
And be ready to say no a lot.
Very good. Well, so I know that CISOs have to kind of balance all of the day-to-day operations that are happening within the organization with security strategy overall, and really thinking about those future threats. So, and I imagine you speak with lots of CISOs all the time who are sort of trying to figure out the right way to balance that stuff. So, what counsel do you provide to them? How do you suggest they keep those things in sync? So it is a good point. One of the most stressful jobs in our industry, obviously, is the CISO role, right? They're the business leader, they're the risk manager, they're the first person that gets a call when things go south. Right.
They very rarely,
when they go south.
They very rarely get a, hey, good job defending this week. So it's a tough job, and I recognize that, and certainly, the industry has got challenges and just CISO, retention, frankly. You see a lot of them.
It sounds like there's a lot of turnover among CISOs.
There is, and that is a challenge, obviously. But I think it's important that, you kind of take a balanced view. And I always like to start with the people, right? Making sure that the people understand the value of what they do every single day. And I think this is true probably in any role, but certainly in security, it's very rare you get good news in the security industry, right? And so we have to recognize that, especially for those folks that are early in career, they understand their role as part of the bigger organization and how what they do every day impacts the overall business, right? We talked about managing risk as being a key piece of that. So I think it's really important to give people an understanding of what they do and how it's important and how it fits in to the broader business. And then they have a career path. They have an understanding of where they're headed in their business. So I think people, you got to start there. Right? Our industry is so people-centric. We talk a lot about tools, but if you don't have the right people, it can be very challenging for a CISO. The second thing I would say is the education, the relationships, trying to build that culture of DNA. And I'm kind of prioritizing how I view, the CISO's role. So educating and being the enabler to the business, I think, is extremely important. And then lastly, I would say, there's this operational component and constantly and consistently evaluating your operational model. Is it the right model? Should everything be in-house? Should I be leveraging partners? Should I outsource parts of my business? And being a good steward of the dollars, right? We talked about investments earlier, and it's a tough job balancing all those dimensions that I discussed. But for a CISO, I think if they kind of focus on the people, right? Think about how they fit into the broader business and educating and enabling, right? And then being a good steward of those investment dollars, I think they can be very successful.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Last question. Always like to kind of, wrap by asking our experts, to look into their crystal balls and see, where things head in the future. So as you think, 3 years out, 5 years out in the security space in general, what are you excited to see? What do you think's coming along that we're going to be seeing out in the marketplace? And predict the future.
Predict the future. Boy, if I did that, I probably wouldn't be here today.
As best you can.
I think we're at a really important time in our industry. I've been doing this, unfortunately, a long time, which has seen a lot of great things and a lot of tough things. But I would say that, particularly with machine learning, I think we're going to see a massive acceleration in the use of machine learning and AI in our industry, which can be very exciting, right? And it may help us with the people problem. We talked about that earlier, right? The ability to leverage machine learning to maybe reduce the stress and the needs of the people that are doing this job every day. So that's exciting to me. That's really exciting to me. Like, to me, it's a point in time when suddenly we see an avenue to a problem around the shortage that's been here for 10, 15 years now. So that's really cool. Unfortunately, on the offensive side, I don't see things getting any better, right? It's just too easy for an adversary and organization to just disrupt. And so, focusing on the basics, again, I'm a big believer in the basics, focusing on the basics, understanding your critical assets, protecting those first. You don't have to protect everything, right? Save the body, lose a finger. I mean, a bad analogy, but you have to really focus on the core parts of your business. And, it's exciting. I'm very, excited, fired up about where this is going. So, hopefully that answered your question, but that's kind of where my head's at.
It does. Well, always in a changing market, and I think it sounds like you like that continual.
Oh yeah, you
always learn new things.
Love it.
Yeah, very good. Well, Mike, always a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah,
Thanks so
Matt.
much for coming today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Hey, and thank you for joining us as well. Another great WWT Experts session. Got plenty more coming up on the calendar going forward. Lots of stuff in the back catalog, so head to wwt.com/events and check that out. Thanks for joining us this time. We'll see you next time.